As a child, I remember flying and seeing this lovely vision in white gloves, plumping up pillows and passing out sweets. But by the time it got to my turn, the job had changed. With the package holidays, the job had become altogether harder and faster, and that lovely vision was no longer there, I'm afraid. I decided to start flying. Well, in fact, it was decided for me. I did it for a bet, and then I suddenly found myself in the middle of a training course.
I was trying to find something to do where I'd be given an education. Flying seemed the ideal thing, and that's what I did, and I'm glad I did it.
I wasn't one of those little girls who always wanted to be an air hostess. I became really a stewardess more by chance than anything else.
I stopped flying because I was getting married, and you couldn't fly. You couldn't go on flying with them if you were married in those days. And in any case, I was marrying a doctor and needed to man his telephone.
On a cold November night, I saw an advertisement in an evening paper and thought, this is for me. They wanted girls to go to South Africa, and I thought, sunshine and travel, that's for me.
What about all those pretty air hostesses?
We call them stewards, female.
Dear BOAC, my name is Millie Fisher, and I'm nearly 10 years old. I'm writing you this letter because when I grow up, I want to be a BOAC stewardess.
Got coffee, sir?
Yes, please. Que guapa, hombre.
¿Desea usted más café, señor?
I toy occasionally with a curious project. I think that it would be a wonderful idea to kill an air hostess. Just kill one, and then stand trial and explain that one did it in the interest of humanity. It's a sort of cream passionnel in reverse.
I close my eyes, then I drift away into the magic night. I softly say a silent prayer.
You they get of you all the time is like your fingertips and your belt, isn't it? Because they're sitting down and you're standing up, walking up and down and serving them and everything, and you don't get much opportunity to speak to them. And if there was a really gorgeous-looking man on a flight, you'd never go and chat him up. You're there to do a job.
In dreams, I walk with you.
Often as not, they intimidate men, not as much as they're on a really high income, especially the female, the person. But you could see this image of the stewardess who was very useful. She went away a lot, she brought back duty-frees. She would obviously be fairly worldly wise, so that made it all terribly useful. She probably wouldn't give him a hassle. It sounded fairly glamorous to say, well...
And as far as I was concerned, it really was, I have to be honest here, a means to an end anyway, because I like to get somewhere. I had a permanent notice up in my crew room saying, I will swap anybody's long haul for my short haul. You can take my short haul, give me your long haul. I want to be away.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of British European Airways, Captain Gilman and his crew would like to welcome you on board this Trident aircraft. Our flight to Athens will take 3 hours, 20 minutes.
Wasn't the hat always an issue? I would hate to have been a cabin service director, actually, because just trying to make everyone wear their hat.
I know. Yeah, but I used to love wearing my hat.
Did you?
I used to think it was fantastic. I
You used to drive to work with it on?
Yeah.
Down the motorway
with the gloves. I used to like the Petit. Air Europe had a great hat, the one that sort of sat forward on the front. That was fantastic.
Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard.
I think BOAC were looking for the well-bred young English girl. Somebody who would be a cross between a nanny and a governess, rather than someone to entertain Daddy on board the aircraft.
It makes you wonder, Are you pretty enough? Bright enough? Willing to work hard enough? Well, baby, you're on your own.
The next few days are a whirl.
Interviews. Dorm assignments. Forms, and more forms. Medical examinations. Pictures of me before. New hairdo. Uniforms. My new wardrobe.
Classes begin at 8 a.m. Theory of flight.
But that wouldn't have passed muster. The hair that length would have to have been up in a bun or tied back. That was a strict regulation, the length of hair. And the skirt's too short as well. The skirt had to cover the kneecap. And gloves had to be worn at all times.
Stewardesses tended in those days to regard the job, perhaps because of the limited time you were allowed to fly, they tended to regard the job less as a career and more as perhaps I'm loath to say a finishing school, but it would be like an extension of a sort of your education, if you like. It would be a time to have fun and be superficial, maybe, and enjoy yourself, but just for a limited time.
In the afternoon, there are 2 hours of exercises called comportment classes, an attempt to improve the students' before photos. These girls are 21 to 28, stand 5'2" to 5'7", and if they enroll with a few excess pounds...
edema is a swelling of the ankles and the stomach, which is, I think, due to the pressure. And there's no way you can take your shoes off because you'll never get them back on again. It's really quite a nasty complaint.
A hostess does plenty of knee bends in the narrow aisle of an airplane, and these teeter boards develop balance, important in rough weather, when her nonchalant poise reassures jittery passengers.
Do you ever look at yourself in the mirror and think, flying did this to me?
Yes, I do.
If you look at your contemporaries, that they've got, like, fresher skin.
Yeah, it's all that time in the sun.
They've actually dissected the insides of sort of crew, and they're sort of ancient when they're actually sort of opened up.
And the body beautiful. Makeup courses enhance the girls' natural loveliness, and apparently the airlines and the bachelors enjoy similar tastes.
You have to obviously look as fresh when you get off the aircraft as you do when you get on, even though you're feeling dead inside. Lots of mineral water sprays, obviously quick rushes to the loo, little quick touch-up here and here, and basically that's what it was, really. The aids, you know, makeup aids, that sort of thing. You know.
I remember one passenger, he said to me, give us a smile. So I said, well, I'll smile if you smile. And he smiled. I said, right, hold it there for 12 hours.
One becomes quite an expert on these hostesses. They're all exactly the same, as identical as a hamburger in California or a hamburger in New York.
My husband has a very, very low opinion of stewardesses. He thinks they're self-opinionated, bossy boots, little madams, and he has got no time for them whatsoever. If you're looking for the jaundiced passenger's point of view, he's your man.
But we were taught the passenger was king, and you never gave any back chat, and you just accepted it.
Some think they have to be in charge.
Sit up, table up, belt tight.
Next. Some think they're just models.
If there's anything else.
Next.
Why did I become an air hostess? I think really I didn't know what to do next, to be honest. I came out of the Navy exactly 45 years ago yesterday, and I was rearing to do something else. I couldn't see myself going home to do the flowers and put notepaper in the bedrooms, and I thought, what can I do with my few skills? I think a lot of us wondered what we would do next. We were ranging around trying to think how to fit into civilian life, and I think we wanted to get sorted out after the war. We didn't want to marry the wrong person on the rebound, having been demobilized, and so we were casting around for something to do that would be fun and that we could just about live on. That was about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, could I have your complete attention, please? One of our crew has suffered a fatal heart attack. There is no need for panic. If anyone has any aviation experience, could they please make their way to the cockpit?
Younger men's image of a stewardess is, you know, possibly the bimbo trolley dolly type image?
Age limitations when I started were, I think you were grounded at 35, 32, 35. And once you reached that age, no matter how good you looked, no matter how good you did your job, you were still grounded. You know, you had one foot in the grave. You couldn't push a trolley. You couldn't serve a drink. You were old. But now, of course, it's changed.
Look, I don't know if I can help, but I've done a bit of gliding.
Have you done any catering?
Catering?
Our stewardess has bought it. Now listen, mister, I don't know you. There are over 100 people back there in need of a snack and some newspapers.
Right.
Do the drinks, do the meals, 2 tea and coffees, duty-frees.
So we learned silver service with a spoon and fork and bottle tops and cold potatoes. And what it really means is a bit like chopsticks. You have the spoon and the fork in one hand, and you have to manipulate the food between them or with them from the dish onto the plate, which is much more difficult than it sounds.
Let's try taking it stage by stage. Number 1. Put a small paper doily on the table. Number 2.
As air hostesses, I have to say, we thought we should be offering better fare than a couple of rather dreary spam or fish paste sandwiches, a slice of indifferent fruit cake in a sort of wrapper, and either an apple or a banana. We used to plonk these on their laps with as much decorum as we could, and then we came around with tea or coffee, because we didn't carry any alcohol in my time.
Then I flew on strata cruisers, which were quite different. They had a downstairs bar, and they had 16 bunks. 8 lower ones, which would accommodate 2 people, and 8 upper ones, which only 1 person was allowed. They were very hard work because it meant moving seats around, and they were quite heavy.
Everybody knows. Everybody knows.
In fact, I know a chief steward who disliked stewardesses so much that he used to send them to bed for the entire crossing of the Atlantic. I did it once.
Everybody knows. Everybody knows. That's how it goes. Everybody knows.
You've got these 10 plastic trays that you are shoving out here, shoving out there. Coffee, tea, coffee. You haven't got the time to actually sit and natter with them, like 19 passengers on a 707 down to Rio de Janeiro.
Tea, 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 tea. I think the tea and coffee used to drive me up the wall.
You're doing very well, Sugar Pop.
Yes. I've just got them off to sleep.
Good. Now wake them up, give them lunch and then breakfast.
They've just eaten.
On one flight, I remember I was going down the cabin going tea, 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 with a pot of tea in my hand. And the senior stewardess came up to me and she said, "Christine, would you like a cup of tea?" So I turned around to her and I said, "No, thanks, I'll have a cup of coffee when I get back to the galley."
We had tea or coffee in thermoses which were strapped by leather straps to the fuselage, which was fine if the plane was flying level. But as the coffee or tea came out of a sort of tap affair, if you were banking in the wrong direction, you couldn't get a drop out of them, and you had to sort of saunter along to the cockpit, which I think they now call the flight deck, and say, "I can't get any coffee." And then the captain or whoever was piloting the plane would say, "All right, love, I'll even her up a bit." And by the time you got back to the galley in the tail, everything was all right, and they'd got the plane flat, and you could get coffee, and you saw that they had their cup, because then they were happy.
2 cups of coffee and a couple of biscuits, quick as you like, love.
You also have to be a babysitter, many times a nanny, a travel advisor, a nurse when people are feeling poorly. Quite a subtle blend of a lot of different roles if you're going to do the job well and you're going to enjoy it. If you regard it just as the kind of the flying waitress, then I think it would just be really frustrating and boring eventually.
One particular memorable flight I had, there were 124 Chinese seamen on board. Every last one of them was airsick. They all smoked, and one fellow spoke English. He was the only one, but every one of them was sick.
Everybody knows the fight was fixed. The poor stay poor, the rich get rich. That's how it goes.
Often passengers weren't aware of how they were being judged behind the galley curtains. And that was another side that I found particularly interesting. People weren't evaluated or judged on who they were, what they were, but how they behaved. And that was interesting.
We had a lady who was doing the snapping the fingers, I want, and he took this all in his stride. The final thing was when she, I said to him, "Steward, I want something for my throat." "Certainly, madam." He goes off into the first-class galley, calmly gets down a silver tray, lays it with a doily, a carnation, and a very large carving knife, puts the cloth over his arm, takes it down, flourishes it under her nose, and says, "Madam, for your throat."
I gather that practical jokes and that sort of thing did happen later on. I never suffered from those personally. I think in my day, all that I was aware of was a great sort of lingering on of RAF jargon. People got ginned up. Everybody was scrambled, and there was a lot of things could be it'll be a piece of cake. Of course I'll do that for you. It's a doddle, you know, this sort of thing.
Cabin doors to manual. Cabin doors to manual? What the bloody hell does that mean? I've no idea, but we always say it.
Everybody knows that BOAC had shares in a chicken farm, and I know where all the wings went to. They went into the lunches we ate for 8 weeks on that training aircraft.
Everybody knows.
I suppose the sort of camp behaviour of some of the gay stewards then rubbed off onto some of the stewardesses, and you would have people who would behave in quite a straightforward and normal way with their family would suddenly have turned terribly camp when they were flying. But then it became a kind of protection. It was their cloak, perhaps, against the world. It's a good form of protection because people often couldn't get through the barrier.
Everybody knows what you've been through. From the bloody cross on top of Calvary to the beach at Malibu. Everybody knows it's coming upon. Take one last look at this sacred heart before it blows. And everybody knows. Everybody knows.
I think at any time to stand up in front of the back cabin used to sort of take about 70 or 80 people. To stand up in front of 80 people and sort of, you can be sure as eggs is eggs that the life jacket, when you put it over and your hair would end up looking like sort of just been pulled through a hedge backwards. And I don't know, I think it's really embarrassing to start with.
One of the things that used to frustrate and annoy me, and I don't know if it did you, was when people weren't watching you and they were hidden behind their papers.
I used to tell them to be quiet. Yes. I used to say shh.
Because it is serious, and at the end of the day, we're the last ones out.
Yes,
and if that person hasn't quite remembered where the emergency exit is, and I don't think people quite appreciate what a serious nature, why we're there.
As regards cabin safety arrangements, I think they were virtually nil. I have no memories of that at all. Once we were airborne, I would go right up to the front and turn my back to the cockpit and face the passengers and tell them they could undo their lap straps and they could smoke, amongst whom were a number of pipe smokers in those days.
The nastiest moment, as I remember it now, was a winter's flight over Labrador at night when we were told by the crew that the light on the cockpit was showing the seal round the main door was not properly tight and that it might go at any minute.
The final emergency landing, which I really thought I might not survive, was very serious. The pilots had got a hydraulic fluid leak and they didn't actually know how much braking power they'd have. So we went into a full emergency. And
to have to go through all the textbook motions with the thought that it might be the last time you did it. But on the other hand, again, the working kept the fear at bay.
Extinguish all lighted cigarettes and loose and restricted clothing. Remove all sharp objects from your person, for example, high heel shoes, dentures and spectacles.
But as not so many weeks earlier, a Pan American stewardess had been sucked out of the aeroplane when a window blew with explosive decompression, I wasn't really enjoying that bit of the flight.
When you hear the words brace for impact or a blast on the whistle, take a bracing position. Put feet firmly on the floor, legs slightly apart and knees bent. Place one arm in a protected position over your head.
We flew over the control tower. They couldn't see the landing gear, so we flew round and round and round for about 8 or 9 times to burn off the fuel. And I kept looking out of the window and seeing Glasgow Cemetery and thought, well, it's not a very romantic place to end my days, but there's a nice little plot down there if that's where we're going to go.
One of our Dakotas crashed just short of Oslo into a Norwegian forest, killing 4 members of the 5-man crew and severely injuring the steward, with whom I had been asked to swap duties. So I should perhaps have been on that plane.
But at the time, it was very, very frightening, and one of the temporary stewardesses that I was with actually freaked out and couldn't cope with it at all. And in fact, we had to sit her in the toilet and lock the toilet because she just couldn't cope with it. And in fact, after that, she didn't fly again.
Be prepared for more than one impact.
I close my eyes, then I drift away. The magic night, I softly say, like dreamers do. Then I fall asleep to dream my dreams of you. In dreams
I became a mother of 5 children, one after another, and then I've got grandchildren, and I'm now a journalist and a writer of books.
And I actually have gone on from flying now. I manage the British Airways nursery, and it took me 2 years to set that up.
I decided that I would train as a nurse, and I've in fact just finished my training. And I'm now a staff nurse.
I'm now, actually, I've turned full circle. I'm actually marketing, doing the PR and marketing for the ex-British Caledonian headquarters in Crawley.
I went off to a career in journalism, and that was something I'd always intended to do.
When I stopped flying, I was lucky enough to get a job with BOAC on the ground in their customer relations office.
I worked for a charity with terminally ill children, and that was a completely different job, but it was so rewarding after what I'd done. I mean, it's excellent.
Well, I had 3 girls, and I stayed at home and looked after them. And then about 10 years ago, I went back to work, and I was involved in the hospice movement, and I also became a magistrate.
Now I'm a happy housewife, and I've taken up my original hobby of portrait painting, and I'm a mature student at my local poly.
Did you ever have the desire when you were a stewardess? Did you ever think, I'd love to be a pilot? Because I never did.
I must admit, no, never hit me that I'd want that responsibility, actually. You don't have quite the pressure.
God, I think
you know, giving
not
people
quite,
pressure.
not quite. The chicken or beef moment is, you know, can be a challenge, can't it?
What would it be like flying now? There's chicken, beef, there's pasta and the salad these days.
Good Lord.
The captain was, of course, God. He was always Sir. All the others in front of the passengers were referred to as Mr.
They are fond of their food, aren't they? And they sleep. And they do the Telegraph crossword. But they're very clever men as well.
They're very good.
Very clever
Very
men.
clever. Absolutely. Get that. Very clever.
Pilots and the first officers, they were a nice bunch of blokes. I didn't really have an awful lot to do with them as far as I was concerned. They flew the plane and that was it. There was too much competition for me to really get involved with them, and there's loads of other girls there, but a lot of the girls seemed to go for the flight deck. I think they're impressed by the stripes.
A stewardess couldn't marry, and therefore, when you got your 10% staff travel, you couldn't share it with anybody. Whereas a steward could be married, and he could take his wife and his 4 children on holiday. So that was worth a great deal to him, which we missed out on. And for some reason, we never complained. We probably knew our place in those days.
I remember being in my little galley in the tail, and I get a buzz as we were approaching some of these cities in Europe which had been badly bombed during the war, whose names were familiar to us because we would know that bombing raids had taken place. And the pilot would very often find it quite difficult to approach this airport and this runway and fly into a place where he was accustomed to being met by shafts of searchlights and by flak. And really and truly, they were quite glad to have the moral support of somebody. I remember standing quite often behind a pilot, and we would talk of this and that as we came in towards the lights and down and landed. And I could well see the trauma it was for them. They were quite shaking to begin with, but they soon got accustomed to it, and one became very familiar with these airports in time.
We were paid £6 10 shillings a week. We also had an allowance of $3.50 a day when we were overseas to cover meals, tips to the bellboys, and any laundry that we couldn't manage ourselves. $3.50 in those days was rather less than £1.
What seems to me to be an awful waste, though, now is airlines still are not taking advantage of women who fly. They've got tremendous qualities. They've got marvellous self-confidence. They have great ability with people. They are frontline marketing people, and yet airlines are wasting this resource. They let them stay in cabin crew. And if you look at an airline like British Airways, for example, there aren't too many women in senior management. There aren't any women on the board. There are former pilots on the board, aren't former cabin crew. I think that's a shame.
Flying to America immediately after the war was almost like going into paradise. You went from very severely rationed Britain into the land of plenty, where everything was available. You could walk into a shop, buy a dress, buy shoes without coupons, buy all the food you wanted, not a coupon in sight. It was really very, very pleasant.
There was a certain amount of petty smuggling that went on, which customs were very much aware of. I remember one particular occasion coming into Heathrow with 2 watches in my bra for relatives, which I had made perfectly sure they weren't ticking, but was then embraced by an exuberant customs man, and I remember thinking, oh dear, is he going to feel those watches? But he didn't, I got away with it. But they were always on the lookout. In fact, they would sometimes take off the winkle picker shoes that the girls wore in those days and feel into the toes and see what there was. But it was all fairly innocent stuff, nothing too terrible.
I paid my rent by bringing back nylon stockings. Customs would allow us to bring a dozen pairs in each time. I sold mine at £1 a pair, and I made £6 a trip, which paid my rent.
We brought in the first immigrants in 1959. They used to leave their beautiful, hot, colourful island to come to England. And they left Kingston Airport in a crocodile. They left the airport buildings, the children first, then followed by the women, and then the men took up the rear. And they'd all bought new clothes. They all wore hats. and gloves. And the men were in dude suits with their hats. And when they got on board the aircraft, of course, they had no conception of where they were going, what they were going to find the other end, or how long it was going to take. And it used to take us a good hour to convince them to take their hats off, to sit down and relax, because they were going to be on this aircraft a long, long time. And another thing that impressed me was nobody ever cried. The people leaving never cried because they were leaving their families. And the families never cried waving them off, because they all were happy. They were going to the land of opportunity, to this marvellous place called England. And as a crew, we used to worry about them because we knew that it wasn't going to be the land of milk and honey, and we knew they were going to have terrible problems. And the first problem they hit, of course, was when we landed. They couldn't conceive what it was like to be cold. When that aircraft door opened, it was unbelievable. And then the crocodile used to leave the aircraft dressed in aircraft blankets because they had no overcoats. And I often used to wonder what, would happen to them.
Luxembourg, Oslo, Budapest, AFN, Hilversum, Helvetia. In the days before rock and roll, in the days before rock and roll, in the days before rock and roll, when we let, then we bet. On Lester Cricket, when we met, we let the goldfish go.
Coming towards the end of a long flight, we would arrange who was going to make the landing drink. We all had a landing drink in those days. And you were very lucky if you were flying with someone who could make up one of these wonderful cocktails. And we'd dock the plane, chocks on rather, passengers off, so it would only be crew on board. And we'd all sort of start off with one of these lovely little landing drinks. And we'd head for the hotel, check in, into the shower, change, off to the captain's room or whoever was having the party, and to decide what we were going to do that night.
I used to find myself going to somewhere like Egypt, and I couldn't find anyone to go and see sunrise over the pyramids with me, and to say that they were boring would be really, I mean, that would not be a very nice thing to say, but I think that a lot of them were really quite content to sort of sit in the hotel room and shopping. I mean, they quite liked the sort of the shopping, the onyx chess set from Mexico and the sort of the camel saddle from Cairo, but within that sort of quite protected and limited way.
So if we were in a country for a few days, obviously it would be out on the town. And if we weren't, if we had to go back the next day, well, it was normally down to the nearest discotheque or a club, or maybe we just stayed partying in whoever's room it was until about sort of 3 in the morning, which was not so good if you had a call at, say, 6 or 7 in the morning. That's when we regretted it. And, we sort of stumbled on board sometimes. I know I did anyway, I can't talk for other people. But I got up in the morning sometimes thinking, my God, I'm never going to do that again. But managed to get through the flight home with maybe just a very little whiff of oxygen.
We take Manhattan.
We were, if you look back, the first emancipated women. We were leaving home in a time when most girls lived with their parents. For example, I would be away for 3 weeks in New York, totally free agent, doing exactly what I wanted to do. But the minute I came back to London and lived with my parents, I was put under curfew again and had to be in at midnight and had to explain myself if I stepped out of lines.
down route. When you're away from friends, when you're away from family, boyfriends, husbands, wives, it's there if you want it. Whether you take the offer up is entirely up to you. All I can, speaking for myself, yeah, I took the offer up a few times, yes. But then I'm single, I don't have any ties.
What about your captain story, Fiona? Well, it's not exclusively captains, Linda. I mean, let's get straight down to the nitty-gritty. No, male members of crew, I think, really, are famous for socialising with female members of crew. I think it's fair to say, don't you? I mean, these things happen. It's like doctors and nurses, isn't it? I don't know. I've never been a nurse.
I think there was, there was 26 straight single guys on the fleet.
All right, Heather. Woo! I got one in there. This is my second one. I'm doing really well. No, I was going on to say because they hadn't recruited for 7 years. This was fact.
And Linda got to know 25 of them.
No, that was what you said. You said I had at least 25 of them.
But the good thing is they always looked after us girls, didn't they?
Yes, they were lovely, some of them actually.
And they were so right, when, you know, in the States, we're meeting for breakfast, we're going to do this today.
At 2 in the morning at the flight deck, I go to the flight deck, knock on your door and ask to borrow the toothpaste and just squeeze it through the keyhole. I think that's really good advice. Not that it ever happened, but...
Not going to talk about Nairobi room parties, am I?
And another whiff of oxygen.
The thing that I think I remember most fondly perhaps about the job, or not so fondly on other flights, was the intenseness of the relationship sometimes. You could get on board and join a crew, and what many people perhaps don't realise is that each time you go away, certainly with long haul and when I was flying, different people, different crew each time. And you could be together for 3 weeks and go to San Francisco through the east and go through Zurich and Delhi and Hong Kong and all those places. And you spent a lot of time together. And you had built up a tremendously intense relationship, and you learnt so much about each other, and secrets would come out, and people would say things about themselves to others they would never say to friends back home. You would then get back to London, and suddenly you would start to really come down to earth as you were in the bus driving up to the area we used to check in and out of, known as Building 221. And you could see the relationships and friendships, sometimes quite intense, that had started on the flight. And there would be the sudden realization that that had ended. And there'd be the family units with the golden Labradors and the children waiting on the pavement. And suddenly, that little capsule and that pocket of life had ended. It was a very, very strange feeling.
That's how it goes. Oh, everybody knows.
Thanks a lot, Linda. I was rusted to Hong Kong on my wedding day, and frankly, I should have taken the Hong Kong. Oh dear, big mistake, big mistake. Crewing, you were right.
Enough alone. Lay off in, start the jazz. Come in, Ray Charles. Come in. The High Priest.